Hello everyone, this is Minyoung Kim. Today, I'm going to present the paper titled as Synthesizing Human Faces Using Latent Space Factorization and Local Weights. In this study, we propose a 3D face generate model with local weights, which can generate 3D faces with a rich variety beyond training data using part manipulation. The goal of this research is to synthesize 3D human face meshes beyond the training data we used, and to produce a rich variety of 3D face model using part manipulation. Manipulating each facial part can be attained by utilizing whole face decomposition and parts-based representation. Our work's main contributions are: first, holistic human face generation with part manipulation. Our model can generate a human face as a whole while enabling part manipulation and deformation. We implement part manipulation through latent space factorization, which maps global latent space to latent subspace. Second, end-to-end learning to learn local feature without facial segmentation. At this point, we utilize local weights obtained by parts-based representation, so replace additional segmentation labels and data, so that factorized subspace can have local information with local weights we apply. Lastly, we measured and visualized the generation ability and the diversity result of the model. There are many studies that utilize principal component analysis to generate facial geometry shape and textures. This is called a 3D movable model, and there are various follow-up studies that added a lot of facial identity or compute poses and light sources. About work using deep learning, the study of creating realistic faces using photorealistic geometry images. There is the study that enables to express non-linear facial expressions by learning meshes using extreme expressions. However, since the neural network learns the data as they receive, manipulating a specific part of a face is impossible when they use whole face meshes as the training data. In order to overcome this, there are several studies about local face models. First, Blunt and Vetter studied local face model with manually divided faces. Tinat et al. Work that used clustering to divide it and transform faces to produce a variety of facial changes. Also, there was a study about facial editing system that identified anatomical relationships between facial segments. However, all the above studies proposed statistical face models based on principal component analysis, which has limitations that they do not represent details of shapes or nonlinear representation. We found some works about parts-based generated model with learning approach. First, there was a model that create the whole shape and break it into parts and refine it. Secondly, a model that learns existing segment information and then generate each part and synthesize it. Lastly, there is a model that proposes decomposer and composer network performing meaningful part manipulation. But most of these work use pre-segmented data or labels, so they cannot be applied to datasets that do not have that segmentation data. Also, additional networks are required that learn part by part data respectively. we propose locally weighted autoencoder. Our system consists of three parts. First, the encoder learns the input data and compresses them in low dimension to generate latent vectors. Second, the projection part decomposes those low-dimensional latent vectors and gives them semantic meaning using local weights. Lastly, the decoder reconstructs those weighted latent vectors. The entire model iterates through this process, learning to form and reconstruct the latent space of the training data. For enabling part manipulation during the process, we utilize local weights, which have semantic meanings produced by parts-based representation. Parts-based representation helps to obtain partial feature without explicit segmentation or label of the whole data. Among many those methods, we use non-negative matrix factorization. We compute local weights before training the model. To calculate this, we input simplified template facial mesh and compute non-negative matrix factorization. Rank K is the number of parts of the face that we want to break down the matrix. As a result, we obtain basis matrix W containing the basic elements of the input matrix and means the weight of the vertex for each part. In this work, we set this W to local weights. Matrix H is the vertex location value for each part, but is not used in our work. The figure below shows the four visualized local weights. Next is the process of decomposing the latent vectors. Latent space decomposition allows to modify or manipulate the face part corresponding to each subspace. It divided the global latent space into multiple localized subspaces. In this study, we decomposed the global latent vectors and mapped them to multiple subspaces through the projection matrices. The full one-dimensional encoding is divided into four parts encodings through the corresponding layer, which transforms from a global latent space to a localized subspace. However, decomposing the latent vector is not enough to make them obtain a semantic meaningful part. Therefore, we applied local weights, which is the data with part-specific meaning, to give semantic part meaning to the factorized vectors. By multiplying local weights and one-dimensional part encodings, it produces locally weighted encodings that lies on part-based subspace. For training and experiment, we use AFLW 2000 3D dataset containing 2000 3D faces generated by Basel face model. We use 1,780 faces as training data and 220 faces as test data. The first experiment is part interpolation. The experimental process is: first, provide source and target face to the model as input data and pass the encoder and project part respectively. Then, apply local weights to decompose latent vectors, and we interpolate the value of the source latent vector to the value of the corresponding target latent vector. This is the result of the faces that was created through the part interpolation. We expected that by applying local weights, the part where the face changes would correspond to the local weight area shown on the leftmost side. If you look at the picture, as you can go from left to right, the face changes from a source face to a part of the target face. The rightmost color visualization shows the main change area in the face. This is also substantially consistent with the contents of the local weights. To show the variety of faces the model can create, we conducted an experiment to measure them. First, we sampled 220 faces from the training data and the test data, respectively. To show the variety of faces that the model can create, we conducted an experiment to measure them. First, we sampled 220 faces from training data and the test data, respectively. Secondly, we sampled the same number of synthesized faces. Choose 5 source faces and 11 target faces randomly to produce a total number of 220 faces by manipulating each 4 face parts. Sampled faces were visualized by projecting them into two-dimensional PCA space and T-SNE space. The synthesized faces were found in CPA space beyond the area of training and test data. Especially in the T-SNE space, we could see that it was observed in a much larger area. These results are some of face generation samples from our proposed models. We can observe a rich expressiveness of the model again because each face is distinguishable even though we apply them one same facial texture. This study proposed a locally weighted autoencoder for synthesis of various faces. Our model could change local parts of the face to enhance the expressiveness of the overall model. And it didn't need any additional segmentation data except parts-based representation. Also, it suggests local weights which give semantic parse meaning to latent vector. Lastly, we could synthesize partially modified 3D faces with a small number of weight parameters using only one global encoder and decoder each. The limitations and future work of this study are as follows. The local weights proposed in this study do not represent facial features clearly compared to direct segmentation. Thus, we might obtain a more meaningful local weights with an improved algorithm. Further research also needs to clarify the correlation between local weights and face changing areas. Finally, the current model is based on autoencoder, but we can apply other generate models, for example, variational autoencoder or GAN model. Thank you for listening my talk. If you have any further questions, please email to the address